As we sit here right now, today, the state of Florida is in the midst of the deadliest surge of the entire pandemic. They're the only state in the union where more people are dying of COVID now than ever. Above it all, Governor Ron DeSantis, still apparently committed to a strategy that involves no active restrictions. Today, though, there are real signs that Floridians are simply fed up. According to the latest from Quinnipiac, more than half of voters, 51%, disapprove of the governor's response. And by a 5-point margin, voters say DeSantis is doing more to hurt the COVID response than to help it. Let's bring in Democratic pollster Fernand Armandi and former Republican Congressman David Jolly, and now the national chairman of the Serve America movement. Lucky for us, both are MSNBC contributors, two of the most assuring voices out of Florida since Bob Ross. David, I'll start with you. What is the current state of people's opinion about DeSantis? Look, he remains popular amongst Republicans, but it seems from the Quinnipiac poll that, you know, he never had Democrats, but he's got to be losing independents now with people being concerned about how he's handled coronavirus.
Yeah, Jason, Florida's a state like many others where elections are 50-50 and they're won by turnout, not persuasion. And so what Ron DeSantis has done very well in his first 2 years is speak the Republican narrative. You know, we want freedom in Florida. We don't want shutdowns. We don't want mandates. I'm the governor that's going to save the economy. And for sympathetic Republicans, it's been very effective. But what you just referred to in the numbers is he's picked the wrong fight. And this is a rare miscalculation by Ron DeSantis, at least when you look just at the raw political numbers. It is clear that what we knew was inevitable, right? We're going to send tens of thousands of Floridian children into a classroom unmasked, and now we're surprised, apparently, by the outbreak of COVID and the number of people are quarantined. So I think what you're seeing with Ron DeSantis is a bit of a pivot right now. Even though he will not concede that he was wrong, he is deputizing the education commissioner in Florida, Richard Corcoran, a former Republican Speaker of the House, to be the enforcement man, to be the person who actually enforces this fight that Ron DeSantis started. And you're seeing DeSantis himself pivot to the treatment narrative, the monoclonal antibodies. He's going to be the leading governor in the country that says we are providing treatment at a rate greater than any other state. And that will be now how Ron DeSantis moves from this school fight over mandated masks and instead becomes this public health guru in the state of Florida that Fox News will anoint the leader in the country.
You know, it doesn't matter to me if it's midichlorians or magic beans. The fact that he's only suggesting that people handle something after they've already gotten sick is part of the problem. Fernand, I want to point out here, this is from the Washington Post. More than half of Florida students are now going to schools mandating masks in defiance of DeSantis. More than half of Florida students are now enrolled in public school districts with mask mandates, despite threats of sanctions from the administration of Governor Ron DeSantis, who decreed that only parents can decide whether their children wear masks. Is the fact that he's basically being ignored by school systems all across the state an indicator of a groundswell of people saying, hey, look, we don't trust you? And is that the kind of thing that's going to bleed into his overall perception of competence? Because I can't imagine that people think he's handling this well.
I think that's right, Jason. And, you know, as you and Congressman Jolly earlier alluded to, there are no happy little trees in these polling numbers for Ron DeSantis. Things look really bad for him for the first time, and it really does look like he's paying a price. And I think you just touched on it. The biggest story right now in Florida is this notion that Emperor DeSantis has no clothes. And we know that by the actions of these school boards who are openly defying not only Governor DeSantis, but also Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran. How do we know this? Well, 5 days ago today, they issued a 48-hour threat to two Florida school districts, those in Alachua and Broward counties, that if within 48 hours or by Monday morning they didn't rescind their mask mandates, they were going to start issuing punitive damages. Well, what's happened since those threats were issued last week? 9 additional counties, as the poll alluded to, over 52% of students in the entire state of Florida are now operating in districts with mask mandates. And I think that's only the beginning. I think there are more to come. I think by the end of the week, we will see the numbers of rebel counties, if you will, grow. And I think that more than anything else, Jason, speaks to the political weakness that this governor has chosen on an issue that is not only anti-science and against all of the medical advice. It's against all practical political reason to do this when parents overwhelmingly want to take every measure possible to protect their children from acquiring COVID in the worst environment for COVID we've seen yet.
Now, Fernand, I'm gonna stay on this because Ron DeSantis looks a lot weaker now than he did maybe 6 months ago. Do you think this is changing the thinking of Democrats in the state as to whether or not they should put up a strong challenger against him in 2022? Because, I mean, again, if this guy is this unpopular for an issue that he has absolutely mismanaged, you can't pivot from saying, I don't think COVID is an issue, to suddenly being like the COVID crusader. Is this changing Democrats on the ground thinking like, okay, maybe this guy is weak, maybe we need to get more serious about 2022?
Well, Jason, you've just touched on one of the open secrets in Florida politics, which was the idea that the Democratic Party at the national level, even though they wouldn't say it out loud, had abandoned Florida. Right. The polling out of this state in the last 3 days suggests that not only is Florida competitive, it would be a foolish decision not to engage, because you have both of the Democratic contenders, of Congressman Charlie Crist and the Agricultural Secretary Nikki Fried, now leading DeSantis in head-to-head matchups. You have Congresswoman Val Demings in a statistical dead heat with Marco Rubio. I think the game has changed in Florida. You know, and God forbid these numbers get worse in terms of the human costs and the human casualties. But if that unfortunate and tragic political reality happens, I think Florida is again there for the taking if the Democrats make the decision to invest now and say, we can win this state based on DeSantis's incompetence and disastrous mismanagement of this pandemic.
David Jolly, I'm thinking of Governor Allen in I think it was 2006 in Virginia. I'm thinking of Greetings in Missouri. You know, the political graveyard is filled with Republican governors who everybody thought were going to be shoo-ins for the nomination or front runners in 2024. How is COVID potentially impacting or damaging the shine on Ron DeSantis as a real 2024 contender?
Well, so Jason, I love this conversation. Ferdinand and I had an exchange recently around this question of competence. You use the word competence, and this is very important, I think, for Democrats to consider. You know, we are so wrapped around Ron DeSantis's ideology, Donald Trump's ideology, the new ideology of the Republican Party. But the reality is the worst characteristic of a politician is to be out of touch, to be incompetent. And so if Florida is the first state that has more deaths, more COVID-related deaths after the vaccine than before, that's a measure of incompetence. If he did not know that the state health officials needed to go to the federal government for more ventilators, that's incompetence. If he didn't know that there were hungry children in Florida eligible for food assistance, but the state failed to apply, that's incompetence. If he was overplaying Border Patrol agent with Governor Abbott while the state of Florida was melting down, that's incompetence. That is a very different narrative that not only could hurt Ron DeSantis' reelection in the state of Florida, but could ultimately hurt him as a presidential candidate. Now, I will say, that takes a lot of discipline from Democrats to tag him with incompetence. And failure to do so, I would say this, Jason, I'll go out on a limb. I've been saying this lately. I think Ron DeSantis could primary Donald Trump in the Republican presidential primary and beat him. And I think Ron DeSantis' political team is making that calculation right now, because understand, he can't wait till 2028. His stock will go down. He will be a former governor of either 6 years or 2 years in 28. His currency's at an all-time high to run for president in 2024. But that means starting now saying, I'm going to run in 2024, and I'm going to beat Donald Trump in the primary.
Fernand Armandi and David Jolly, thank you so much. I wouldn't want to touch any of DeSantis' currency. It's covered in COVID. Thank you so much for coming into the show.